Was J. Robert Oppenheimer plagued by guilt for his role in creating the atomic bomb? Or did he ultimately see himself as a hero for his scientific achievement? The ending of Oppenheimer attempts to answer these questions and many more. There are a number of primary threads that weave their way through Oppenheimer. First and foremost is the Manhattan Project, but that arc doesn't begin until the middle act. The first hour primarily concerns Oppenheimer's early years, including the beginning of his time at UC Berkeley. Before he's recruited to build the bomb, he becomes involved in a number of leftist political organizations. These are later held over his head as both leverage and the weight with which rival Louis Strauss attempts to sink him. The rest of the film follows the development of the A-bomb, which sees Oppenheimer drift ever further from the morals that once guided him. After the war, he seems a shell of his former self, and is made an enemy by his own government. The final act of Oppenheimer truly starts after the Trinity test. Every moment before builds up to the first A-bomb detonation. It's the inescapable event around which the whole movie revolves, and everything that happens afterwards is in response to the weapon's creation. Early on in the construction of the Los Alamos facility, Oppenheimer's close friend and colleague, Isidore Isaac Rabi, objects to the project of building a bomb, telling him that the military is only using the scientists as tools. They need us, Oppenheimer tells him. Until they don't, Rabi replies. As soon as the successful Trinity test is over, we see just how right he was. General Leslie Groves, who up to this point has been one of Oppenheimer's strongest supporters, quickly brushes him off. He promises to keep the director updated on plans to use a bomb against Japan, but his cavalier tone lays bare the emptiness in his words. Later, after the horrific bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Oppenheimer makes an appointment with President Harry S. Truman.
Truman needs to know what's next.
What's next?
In the meeting with the president, Oppenheimer argues for heavy international regulation and strict bans on further atomic weapons use. Truman laughs him off, sends him away, and calls him a crybaby. After the end of World War II, Oppenheimer shifts focus for its final act. Louis Strauss becomes a primary villain of sorts, as it's revealed that he orchestrated the farcical hearings to revoke Oppenheimer's security clearance. Because so much of the film is spent on the Manhattan Project itself, we don't get as much time developing the relationship between the two men. Early on, we see how Strauss courts Oppenheimer to chair the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton after the war. We also see Oppenheimer embarrass him on several occasions, generally related to his opposition to the H-bomb, of which Strauss is a huge proponent. Though his early efforts to sweep Oppenheimer off of the political stage are successful, Strauss is later punished when he's denied a cabinet appointment. What's the purpose of Strauss's story in the larger scope of the film? Aside from being the man who made it his mission to destroy Oppenheimer, Strauss represents an opposite kind of historical figure. He wishes to be remembered for his impact on the world, and is obsessed with how others view him. Oppenheimer, by contrast, is made famous whether he likes it or not. His actions immortalize him as a hero to some and a villain to many others. Strauss never achieves that level of infamy, though in a twisted way, he wants it. The security hearings that stripped Oppenheimer of his reputation play an important role in the film. One of the earliest scenes show Oppenheimer reading a statement to the assembled review board, even though he knows it won't go over well. As Rabi tells him, it's a kangaroo court, but Oppenheimer still fights hard to preserve his name. It's not technically a trial, but the effect is the same. And while the US government puts Oppenheimer on the stand against accusations of communist sympathizing and anti-American activity, the film puts him on trial for much larger issues. So how are people today to judge him? Perhaps he's right that someone else inevitably would have built the bomb had he not, but his repeated claims of not being responsible for how it's used ring hollow. Oppenheimer tells Truman that he has blood on his hands, and he does, quite a bit in fact. During the hearings, his wife Kitty says that history will never forgive him, whether or not he lets himself be tarred and feathered. Despite his progressive political leanings, his support for organized labor, and his persistent pushes to stop nuclear development after the war, Oppenheimer cannot be cleared of the crimes his work allowed.
I don't know if we can be trusted with such a weapon.
The Louis Strauss plotline ends in pretty dramatic fashion, with his cabinet nomination officially getting blocked, thanks in part to a vote from a young John F. Kennedy. An unnamed political aide puts a bullet on the Strauss arc with a line that calls out the villainous character's enormous ego. After hearing of his rejection, Strauss puts the blame on Oppenheimer, stating that he turned the scientific community against him. According to Strauss, it all started when Oppenheimer and Albert Einstein had a conversation about him by a pond at Princeton. As the aide points out though, Strauss has no way of knowing that the new physicists were speaking about him. Perhaps he suggests they were discussing something more important. In the film's final scene, we learn that Einstein and Oppenheimer were indeed talking about much larger issues. Strauss's self-obsession is reflective of one of the movie's main ideas, that men who aspire to be great often disregard the greater ramifications of their actions. There's a distinction between Einstein and Oppenheimer, both of whom carry a level of intense regret for their successes, and Strauss who only cares about being on the cover of Time. During the final moments of Oppenheimer, we get a glimpse of the physicist's twilight years. In 1963, he receives the Enrico Fermi Award from the President of the United States, signifying a rehabilitation of his national image in the annals of history. Still, it's a hollow moment. In their conversation by the pond, Einstein predicts that Oppenheimer will receive an award for his work. However, he also says that it won't really be for Oppenheimer, but for the people who give it to him. Such is a reward for great men who yield terrible consequences, Einstein tells him. In the wake of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, Oppenheimer is plagued by guilt. This is one area where the movie takes a fair share of creative license with the real Oppenheimer's life. We know from his work that he opposed the use of atomic weapons after the war, as well as the development of even more deadly weapons like the hydrogen bomb. However, it's impossible to know whether or not he was truly stricken in the way depicted in the movie. But in Nolan's version, Oppenheimer begins to have horrifying visions immediately after the end of the war. His speech to the other scientists at Los Alamos, in which he claims that his only regret is that the bomb wasn't finished in time to be used against the Nazis, did happen.
It's about unleashing a strong force before the Nazis do.
In the movie, this becomes a loaded claim, as Oppenheimer seems far less confident in the way the weapon was used against Japan. His conviction is largely based on the necessity of beating Hitler to the superweapon. However, without that concrete enemy, he seems lost. During his Los Alamos speech, Oppenheimer begins to experience hellish visions of the end of the world. He sees flashes of white light that mirror the explosion at the Trinity test, followed by grotesque shots of the skin peeling off of the assembled scientists. Outside, he sees a couple cowering in fear, and a young man vomiting uncontrollably on the ground. It's the film's way of showing a tiny portion of the atrocities committed by the US against Japan, imagined through Oppenheimer's perfect knowledge of the weapon and channeled through his own corner of the world. In the film, years pass, but the visions don't stop. Oppenheimer is plagued by dreams of fire engulfing the earth, which punctuate every act of the film as grim reminders of what he's wrought. Then at the very end, we get an even more vivid vision of the future, one that hasn't actually come to pass. Chatting with Einstein by the pond, Oppenheimer sees the intercontinental ballistic missiles that later grow out of his creation. He imagines himself in the cockpit of an airplane, watching the sky as nuclear warheads blaze by overhead. A patch of peaceful sunny cloud cover is shattered by countless rockets launching. From orbit, we see the very atmosphere of the Earth catching fire. Thankfully, this nightmare hasn't come to pass in the real world, but even in a post-Cold War age, the threat remains. In his conversation with Einstein by the pond, Oppenheimer lays bare his guilt. The older scientist tells him that he'll spend the rest of his life grappling with the consequences of his achievements. Accomplishment means nothing when the thing you've accomplished is a nightmare, the movie seems to say. Though Oppenheimer completed everything he set out to do at Los Alamos, the conviction that initially compels him has turned hollow by the time the bomb is dropped. In this moment, it's easy to reflect on his earlier scenes. His first class taught at UC Berkeley to only one student stands out. Despite a practically empty classroom, Oppenheimer is filled with excited energy. He talks about light, space, and his black hole theories. He talks about the magic of quantum physics, and there's a genuine joy in his voice. What would have become of him if he had instead stayed in that field of study? What if he had continued his labor organizing and focused solely on quantum theory, leaving the Manhattan Project to others? When he signs on, he believes it's a necessary evil to defeat Germany. But that turns out not to be true. By then, though, he believes he's too far gone. He can't go back to the classroom in the same way. So he chooses to see his achievement through to its conclusion, murderous though it may be. Throughout its entirety, Oppenheimer keeps coming back to the idea of chain reactions. It's a core principle that makes nuclear weapons work. And it's the final note of the final scene. While speaking with Einstein, Oppenheimer recalls making calculations that led him to believe that an atomic detonation might set the entire planet on fire. Though this proved to be wrong, he believes that they still started a chain reaction that will destroy the world. The whole movie is filmed like a chain reaction, with fragmented scenes spliced in between each other, constantly rolling from one thing to the next with no breaks. It's a cascading series of events that no one, viewer or character, can stop. After successfully building the bomb, Oppenheimer can't turn back the clock. Physics takes over, leaving him with the weight of what he's done.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
In time, this chain reaction blows back on him, leading to the security hearings and the revocation of his government clearance. His wife is forced to hear the ugly details of his affairs, and though she stands by him, their relationship is deeply scarred. The A-bomb begets the H-bomb, which leads to an ongoing wave of world-ending weapons. What we're left with at the end of Oppenheimer is a full portrait of a man. He loves literature, language, and art, Is he a communist? According to him, only sort of, though he opposes fascism on all fronts and donates to numerous left-leaning causes. He's a father, but not a good one, by his own admission. He's an excellent scientist. From a certain angle, however, he may be the worst of them all. By the end, Oppenheimer is fully aware that he's anything but a hero, and that he may not even be deserving of pity. And yet, he knows that history is anything but concrete. Alfred Nobel created dynamite, he reminds us, but is remembered for his contributions to learning. Perhaps the most unsettling thing about Oppenheimer is that we still don't know what his full legacy will be.